August 13th, 2018, 1:48 p.m. Frederick, Colorado. A neighbor's security camera captures a white pickup truck backing into a driveway. A man gets out. He opens the front door of his house. He's inside for 13 minutes. When he comes back out, he's carrying something. He loads the truck. He drives away. That neighbor didn't know it then, but that security footage, time-stamped and date-stamped, just documented one of the most crucial pieces of evidence in a case that would be solved in less than 48 hours. 48 hours. From missing persons report to confession. From concerned husband to convicted killer. From mystery to resolution in 2 days. This case was solved faster than almost any homicide investigation in modern history. The evidence was overwhelming. The timeline was airtight. The technology was definitive. Within 48 hours, investigators had cell phone data, GPS tracking, digital searches, security footage, and text message records that painted an undeniable picture of what happened. But here's what makes this case critically important for understanding cold cases. If this exact crime had happened in 1998, 20 years earlier, it would still be unsolved today. It would be a cold case. The family would still be waiting for answers. The perpetrator would likely never have been caught. The only difference between a solved case and a cold case isn't always the quality of the investigation. Sometimes it's simply the technology available at the time the crime occurred. In 2018, this case was solved in 48 hours because of cell phone GPS data, smart home devices, social media records, digital banking trails, and surveillance systems that documented every movement. In 1998, none of that technology existed in a usable form for criminal investigations. The same crime, committed 20 years earlier, would have gone cold. And that's exactly what's happening right now with cold cases from the 1980s and 1990s. Cases that went unsolved, not because investigators failed, but because the technology that would have solved them in 48 hours simply didn't exist yet. This case, solved in 2018, is a perfect example of what modern technology makes possible. And by examining exactly what technology solved this case so quickly, we can understand what's now being used to solve cold cases that have been frozen for decades. Before we go any further, I need to know something. Where are you watching from right now? Seriously, drop your location in the comments. Are you in the United States, Canada, the UK, somewhere else in the world? I want to see how far this story is reaching. How many people understand that the technology solving cases today is the same technology finally cracking cold cases from decades ago? And if you care about seeing cold cases solved, about understanding how technology is bringing justice to victims whose cases went cold for years or decades, you need to subscribe to Cold Case right now. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single update, and smash that like button, because it pushes this story to more people who need to hear it. We specialize in cases that law enforcement forgot, cases that went cold, cases where families have been waiting decades for answers. We dig into the evidence, we follow the new technology, we track the breakthroughs that are finally bringing these forgotten victims justice. This case from 2018 was solved in 48 hours, but the technology that solved it is now being used to solve cases that have been cold for 20, 30, even 40 years. Cases where the same evidence exists, but the technology to analyze it properly didn't exist when the crime occurred. Now let's dive into exactly what technology solved this case in 2018, and why that same technology is revolutionizing cold case investigations across the country. August 13th, 2018. The morning started with a missing persons report. A concerned friend called police after being unable to reach someone and finding the house locked with no one home. Local police responded. They began a missing persons investigation. Within hours, that investigation became a homicide case, and within 48 hours, it was solved. The speed of this resolution was unprecedented, but it wasn't luck. It wasn't a confession that came easily. It was technology. Layer after layer of digital evidence that made lying impossible. Let me break down exactly what technology existed in 2018 that made this case solvable in 2 days. and what wouldn't have existed if this same crime had occurred in 1998. First, cell phone GPS data. Every modern smartphone constantly communicates with cell towers, and that communication creates a detailed record of the phone's location. Not just approximate location based on which tower it's pinging, but actual GPS coordinates tracked continuously throughout the day. In 2018, investigators obtained cell phone records for the suspect within hours of opening the investigation. Those records showed exactly where his phone had been on August 13th. Every location, every timestamp, a complete digital trail of his movements from early morning through the evening. The phone data showed his phone leaving the house at a specific time, traveling to a specific location, remaining at that location for a specific duration, then traveling to another location. The GPS was accurate to within meters. It created a timeline that was impossible to dispute. In 1998, cell phones existed, but GPS tracking didn't. Cell tower data could show approximately which area a phone was in based on which tower it connected to, but that might cover several square miles. It couldn't pinpoint exact locations. It couldn't create the kind of minute-by-minute movement timeline that was crucial to solving this case. Without that GPS data, this case in 1998 would have relied on witness statements, physical evidence, and the suspect's own account of his movements. And if the suspect lied about where he was, investigators would have had no technological way to definitively prove he was lying. Second, vehicle GPS and telematics. Modern vehicles, especially trucks and SUVs manufactured after 2015, contain sophisticated computer systems that track everything the vehicle does. Speed, location, whether doors were opened or closed, whether the vehicle was started or stopped. All of this data is stored in the vehicle's computer system and can be extracted by investigators. In this case, the suspect's truck had a telematics system. Investigators extracted the data from that system. It showed every trip the truck made on August 13th, where it went, how long it stayed at each location, the exact routes it traveled, whether the tailgate was opened or closed at various points. This data corroborated and expanded on the cell phone GPS data. It created an even more detailed picture of the suspect's movements. And critically, it showed the truck traveling to locations that the suspect initially denied visiting. In 1998, vehicles had no such systems. There was no way to extract digital data showing where a vehicle had been. Investigators would rely on witness sightings, toll records if the vehicle used toll roads, and gas station receipts. But a minute-by-minute record of every location a vehicle visited, that didn't exist. Third, digital search history. In 2018, investigators obtained a warrant for the suspect's internet search history. What they found was damning. Searches conducted in the days and weeks before the crime. Searches about how to dispose of remains. Searches about whether bodies float. Searches about decomposition rates. These searches demonstrated premeditation. They showed planning. They contradicted the suspect's initial claims that nothing was wrong, that he had no idea what happened. The digital searches provided a window into his thoughts and intentions before the crime occurred. In 1998, internet existed, but it was far less ubiquitous. Many people didn't have home internet access. Search engines were primitive. And most importantly, there was no infrastructure for law enforcement to easily obtain search histories. ISPs didn't routinely log every website users visited. The technology and the legal framework for obtaining that data didn't exist in a practical form. Without access to search history, investigators in 1998 would have had no way to demonstrate premeditation beyond physical evidence like purchases or witness statements about things the suspect said or did. Fourth, text message and social media records. This case involved extensive text message communications between the suspect and the victims in the days before the crime. Messages about plans, messages about schedules, messages that established a timeline of events. Investigators obtained those text messages within hours. They showed what was discussed, when conversations happened. They provided context for the relationship dynamics and the events leading up to the crime. They also showed messages the suspect sent after the victims disappeared, messages that were provably false based on other evidence. Additionally, social media activity was crucial. The victims had social media accounts that showed their normal patterns of communication and posting. When that activity suddenly stopped, it established a clear timeline, and the suspect's social media activity after the crime contradicted his claims about normalcy. In 1998, text messaging was extremely limited. Many people didn't have cell phones. Those who did often had plans that charged per text message, so texting wasn't a primary form of communication. Social media didn't exist. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, none of those platforms had been created yet. Investigators in 1998 would have had no text messages to analyze, no social media activity to review. They would rely entirely on phone call records, which only showed that a call was made and how long it lasted, not what was said, and witness statements about conversations, which could be disputed or misremembered. Fifth, security camera footage. This case was solved in part because of a neighbor's security camera that captured the suspect's activities at a crucial time. That footage was time-stamped. It showed exactly what happened and when. It was digital, easily retrievable, and high enough quality to be useful as evidence. But that footage wasn't from a professional security system. It was from a consumer-grade doorbell camera, one of millions installed at homes across America in the mid-2010s. These devices became popular because they were inexpensive, easy to install, and connected to the internet, so homeowners could view footage remotely. In 1998, home security cameras were rare and expensive. They recorded to VHS tapes that had to be manually changed. The quality was often poor, and critically, most homes didn't have them. The neighbor's camera that provided crucial evidence in this case simply wouldn't have existed 20 years earlier. Sixth, financial transaction records. Every purchase made with a credit or debit card creates a digital record with a timestamp and location. In this case, investigators obtained the suspect's financial records and could see every transaction he made in the days before and after the crime. Those records showed where he was, what he bought, and when. They corroborated other evidence about his movements. They also showed the absence of certain transactions that would have been expected if his version of events were true. In 1998, credit cards existed, but many more transactions were conducted in cash. ATM records might show withdrawals, but they wouldn't show what the cash was spent on. And obtaining financial records was a slower process. In 2018, this data was available to investigators within hours. Seventh, smart home technology. This detail isn't widely discussed, but it was mentioned during the investigation. The home had smart devices, including a doorbell system and possibly other connected devices. These devices create logs of when they're activated, when doors are opened, when motion is detected. In 2018, these logs provided additional timeline data. They helped establish when certain events occurred. They created yet another layer of digital evidence that had to align with the suspect's story, and when it didn't, it exposed lies. In 1998, smart homes didn't exist. There were no connected devices logging household activity. Investigators would have to rely on traditional evidence, forensics, witness statements, and physical clues. Let me break down what that means for cold case investigations happening right now. Quick question before we continue. What time is it where you are right now? Let us know in the comments. I'm curious how many of you are watching this late at night, thinking about how technology has changed investigations. How many are watching during your lunch break? How many are starting your day with this case? Drop the time in the comments. Now, let's talk about what this means for the hundreds of cold cases from the 1980s and 1990s that are finally being solved with technology that didn't exist when those crimes occurred. The case from 2018 was solved in 48 hours because 7 different types of digital evidence all pointed to the same conclusion. Cell phone GPS, vehicle telematics, search history, text messages, social media, security footage, financial records. Each piece corroborated the others. Lying was impossible because the digital trail was undeniable. But in 1998, none of that technology existed in a practical, accessible form for criminal investigations. A case with the exact same physical circumstances would have been far harder to solve. It might have gone cold. The suspect might have maintained his lies because there would be no digital evidence to contradict him. And that's exactly what happened with thousands of cases from the 1980s and 1990s. Cases where suspects lied about their whereabouts, their activities, their intentions. Cases where investigators knew something was wrong but couldn't prove it because the technology to definitively establish timelines and movements didn't exist. Those cases went cold, not because investigators failed, not because the evidence wasn't there, but because the technology to interpret that evidence, to create digital timelines to expose lies, simply hadn't been invented yet. But here's what's changed. Many of those digital technologies now work retroactively on old cases. Cell tower data from the 1990s still exists in some archives. It's not as precise as modern GPS, but reanalyzing it with modern algorithms and modern understanding of tower coverage patterns can provide better location data than was possible when the crime first occurred. Financial records from the 1990s exist in digital archives. Modern data analysis tools can find patterns in spending that would have been invisible to investigators reviewing paper statements in the 1990s. And perhaps most importantly, the absence of digital evidence in old cases has become evidence itself. If someone claimed they were home all evening in 1998, it was hard to disprove. But if they claimed they were home all evening in 2018 and their phone GPS shows they weren't, that's definitive. Cold case investigators are now looking at old cases and asking, if this crime happened today, what digital evidence would exist? And in cases where suspects are still alive and still using technology, they can sometimes obtain current digital data that contradicts old statements. But the most significant parallel between this 2018 case and modern cold case work is the timeline reconstruction. The reason this case was solved so quickly is that investigators could build an absolutely precise, minute-by-minute timeline of what happened. Every piece of digital evidence added another data point to that timeline, and when the timeline was complete, the truth was undeniable. Cold case investigators are now doing the same thing with cases from decades ago. They're building timelines using evidence that exists but was never properly analyzed. Old phone records that can be re-examined. Credit card statements that can be mapped. Witness statements that can be cross-referenced with new precision. The 2018 case showed what's possible when you have complete digital records. Cold case investigations are showing what's possible when you go back and find the fragments of data that existed in the 1980s and 1990s, data that was collected but never fully analyzed because the tools to analyze it didn't exist yet. If you're finding this information valuable, if you're understanding how technology has changed investigations and how it's now solving cold cases, do me a favor right now. Hit that like button. Seriously, I know it seems like a small thing, but it makes a massive difference. YouTube's algorithm pushes content based on engagement, and every like tells the platform that this story matters, that people care about understanding how cold cases are being solved. Your engagement helps us bring attention to victims whose cases went cold. It keeps their stories alive. It shows that people still care about justice even decades later. So hit that like button, drop a comment, share this video with someone who follows cold cases and needs to understand how technology is changing everything. Now, let's talk about the specific technologies from the 2018 case that are now being used to solve cold cases from decades ago. The cell phone GPS data that was crucial in 2018 has a historical parallel: cell tower records from the 1990s. When cell phones first became common in the mid-1990s, the towers logged which phones connected to them and when. This data was stored, and in many cases it still exists in archives. In the 1990s, this data wasn't particularly useful for investigations. A cell tower might cover 10 or 20 square miles. Knowing that someone's phone pinged a particular tower told you they were somewhere in that coverage area, but that wasn't precise enough to be decisive evidence in most cases. But in 2024, cold case investigators are going back to that old cell tower data and reanalyzing it with modern tools. They're using modern coverage maps that show exactly which areas each tower reached. They're using multiple towers to triangulate positions more precisely. They're cross-referencing tower data with traffic cameras, ATM locations, gas stations, and other fixed points to narrow down where someone actually was. This reanalysis of old cell data has helped solve several cold cases in recent years. Cases where a suspect claimed to be in one location, but their phone was pinging towers in a completely different area. In the 1990s, that evidence might have been considered too imprecise. In 2024, with modern analysis, it's becoming definitive. The vehicle telematics from the 2018 case has a parallel in old vehicles that still exist. If a suspect in a 1990s cold case still owns or has access to the vehicle they drove at the time, and if that vehicle is old enough to have even basic computer systems from the late 1990s or early 2000s, there might be data that can be extracted. More commonly, cold case investigators are using modern GPS data from suspects who are still alive and still driving. If a suspect in a 1995 cold case is still alive in 2024, investigators might surveil their current movements, looking for patterns. Do they visit the area where evidence was found? Do they avoid certain locations? Modern GPS tracking of current behavior can sometimes reveal guilty knowledge about old crimes. The search history that was so damning in the 2018 case has opened up entire new avenues for cold case work. Obviously, internet search history from before the mid-1990s doesn't exist because the internet was barely accessible to consumers. But for cases from the late 1990s and early 2000s, some search data still exists in archives. Internet service providers and search engines have been subpoenaed in several cold case investigations to provide historical search data from their archives. In some cases, this data still exists. In others, it's been deleted. But when it exists, it can be explosive evidence demonstrating what someone was thinking about and researching at the time of a crime. The text messages and social media from 2018 have revolutionized how investigators understand relationships and communications. For cold cases from before text messaging was common, investigators are finding that re-examining old phone records with modern relationship mapping tools can reveal patterns that weren't obvious in the 1990s. If two people talked on the phone 30 times in the week before a crime, then suddenly stopped communicating, that pattern means something. In the 1990s, investigators might have noted it. In 2024, relationship mapping software can analyze hundreds of phone calls and identify patterns, clusters, sudden changes in communication frequency that indicate something significant happened. The security camera footage from 2018 that captured crucial moments has inspired cold case investigators to search for old footage that might still exist. Gas stations, banks, convenience stores, all had security cameras in the 1990s. Most of that footage was recorded on tapes that were reused or thrown away, but some wasn't. There have been cases where old security footage, stored in evidence lockers or archived by businesses that closed, has been rediscovered decades later and provided crucial evidence in cold cases. The quality is often poor by modern standards, but modern enhancement techniques can sometimes extract usable images from footage that looked useless in the 1990s. The financial records that helped establish timelines in 2018 are one of the most valuable resources for cold case work. Credit card statements, bank records, ATM withdrawals, all of this data from the 1980s and 1990s still exists in digital archives. Cold case investigators are obtaining these records and analyzing them with modern data analysis tools. They're looking for purchases that indicate planning or preparation. They're looking for ATM withdrawals in locations that contradict alibis. They're mapping financial activity to geographical locations and creating movement timelines that weren't possible to construct in the 1990s. And the smart home technology from 2018, while obviously not applicable to 1990s cases, has created a new investigative mindset. Investigators now think in terms of digital footprints, device logs, automated records. They're going back to old cases and asking, what devices existed in the 1990s that might have created logs? Pagers had logs. Early car phones had logs. Building security systems had logs. Answering machines recorded timestamps. Some of this data still exists, and when it exists, it can be analyzed with modern precision. Before we wrap this up, I want to know something. Do you follow other cold cases? Have you been following a case for years waiting for a breakthrough? Drop the case name in the comments. I'm curious what unsolved cases are on your radar. What cold cases do you want to see solved with modern technology? Now, let's piece together what this all means for cold case investigations and why understanding the technology is crucial. The 2018 case was solved in 48 hours because of an overwhelming amount of digital evidence. 7 different types of technology all created records that corroborated each other. The suspect couldn't lie effectively because every lie was contradicted by digital data. This case represents the peak of what's possible with modern investigative technology. It shows what investigators can accomplish when they have complete digital records of someone's movements, communications, and activities. But here's the crucial insight for cold case work. That same technological capability is now being turned backward in time. Investigators are going back to cases from the 1980s and 1990s and asking, what digital data existed then that we didn't properly analyze? What records were kept that we didn't understand the value of? What evidence exists that we now have the tools to interpret? And they're finding answers. Cell tower data from 1995 that can now be reanalyzed with better precision. Credit card records from 1998 that can be mapped to geographical movements. Phone records from 1992 that can be analyzed for relationship patterns. Security footage from 1997 that can be enhanced with modern software. The technology that solved the 2018 case in 48 hours is now solving cases that have been cold for 25 or 30 years. It's just being applied to older data that was collected but never fully exploited. This is why cold case units across the country are seeing breakthrough after breakthrough. It's not that they're suddenly working harder or getting luckier. It's that the technology has finally caught up to the evidence that was collected decades ago. And here's what makes this particularly important. If you understand what solved the 2018 case, you understand what's solving cold cases right now. It's the same technology. It's the same analytical approach. It's the same recognition that digital data creates timelines that are nearly impossible to contradict. The 2018 case went from missing persons report to solved homicide in 48 hours. Cold cases from the 1990s are going from unsolved for 30 years to arrests and convictions. The timeline is different, but the methodology is the same. Use every available piece of digital evidence to build an undeniable timeline of what actually happened. This case was solved quickly, but it shows us why cases that went cold are now being solved. Because the technology that made quick solutions possible in 2018 can now be applied retroactively to evidence from decades ago. After 48 hours in 2018, the case was solved. After 20 or 30 years, cold cases are finally being solved. Different timelines, same technology, same result, justice. If you haven't subscribed to Cold Case yet, what are you waiting for? We cover cases just like this one. Cases that went cold for years, even decades. Cases where new technology, new analysis methods, or new approaches are finally bringing justice, and you don't want to miss what happens next. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications so you're alerted the moment we drop updates on cold case breakthroughs or cover new cases being solved with technology. The digital revolution in cold case work is just beginning. Hundreds of cases are being reviewed right now. Evidence that sat in storage for decades is being reanalyzed. Justice is being served years after families thought hope was lost. You've followed the evidence this far. You've seen how technology changes everything. Now stay with us as we watch cold case after cold case get solved. Subscribe now. We've covered a lot of ground in this investigation. 48 hours from crime to solution in 2018. 7 different types of digital technology that made lying impossible. A timeline constructed from GPS data, vehicle telematics, search history, text messages, social media, security cameras, and financial records. A case that would have gone cold in 1998 but was solved in 2 days in 2018 because of technology. This case represents both what's possible and what wasn't possible for so long. It shows the power of modern investigative technology, and by understanding what solved this case so quickly, we understand what's now solving cold cases from decades ago. The victim in this case deserved safety and protection. The case deserved to be solved quickly. And it was because in 2018, the technology existed to create an undeniable record of what happened. But victims from cases in the 1980s and 1990s deserved the same quick resolution. Their families deserved the same rapid justice. They didn't get it because the technology didn't exist yet. Those cases went cold not because investigators failed, but because the tools to solve them quickly hadn't been invented. For 20, 25, 30 years, families waited. Cases went cold. Evidence sat in storage. Suspects lived without consequences. But their story isn't over. The technology that solved the 2018 case in 48 hours is now solving their cases after decades. The same analytical methods, the same commitment to building undeniable timelines, the same recognition that digital evidence, even old digital evidence, can expose lies and reveal truth. This case from 2018 was solved in 48 hours, but it teaches us why cases from 1998 are being solved in 2024. Technology caught up, tools became available. Data that existed but couldn't be properly analyzed in the 1990s can now be interpreted with precision. Justice came quickly in 2018. Justice is coming slowly but surely for cases from decades ago. The timeline is different, the technology is the same, and the result is justice. For cases that went cold because technology didn't exist, technology is now bringing resolution. Evidence that was collected but not fully exploited is being reanalyzed. Digital footprints that seemed meaningless in the 1990s are being mapped with modern precision. This case was solved in 48 hours. Cold cases are being solved after 48 months or 48 years. But they're being solved. Technology is making it possible. And families who waited decades are finally seeing justice. If this case helped you understand how technology has revolutionized investigations, if you now see why cold cases from decades ago are finally being solved, if you believe that justice delayed is not justice denied, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Cold Case. We're tracking the technology that's solving cold cases across the country, cases from the 70s, 80s, and 90s that are finally getting breakthroughs. You won't want to miss these stories of how digital evidence is bringing justice decades later. Leave a comment with your thoughts. What technology do you think will solve the most cold cases? What cases from the 1990s do you want to see solved? And share this video with anyone who follows true crime and needs to understand that technology is changing everything. 48 hours in 2018. 48 years for some cold cases. But justice is coming. Technology is making it possible, and no case is too old to solve anymore.